Hello, welcome to this recording of Inside Cheshire's Digital Archive and a review of my book number 8. I'm Barry Emery, and it's September 2023. I gave this presentation twice during the summer of 2023, and now I'm recording it to put up on YouTube. As a way of introduction, let me just tell you I'm a retired computer teacher at Taconic High School. And after I retired, I became the town perambulator. And what that means is it was my job to go out into the woods and up onto the mountains and check on all the cornerstones that mark the boundaries of Cheshire. I did that with my friend Rick Salvi. We spent the entire summer going around and checking on those cornerstones. Some of them were broken, and we actually got some granite markers to replace the broken ones. Now, a lot of the corner markers were just field stones, like the picture on the right. Each one was marked with a C or a W or a D or an A for the corners of Cheshire and Dalton and Adams and so on. After I retired, I also became a member of the Cheshire Historical Commission. Now, the Historical Commission has the job of keeping track of all our documents, our historical archive, and we keep those documents up over the current police station. And there isn't a lot of storage up there, so many things are just piled in boxes. There's a couple of display cases, but it's very disorganized. And when I first went up there, I thought, what would happen if we had a fire or we had a water issue, a leak? All that would get destroyed. So I decided to use my iPhone and just familiarize myself with what's there and photograph everything. Now, there's an advantage to having a digital photograph rather than using film or taking the documents out and Xeroxing them. First of all, information can be stored on a computer, and that gives you a lot of advantages. It makes it easy to copy those documents, it's easy to share them with other people. It makes it easy to store them and make backup copies. But the most advantage is that once they're on the internet, you can access them remotely. They're not there yet, but I hope they get to the internet soon. I've given copies to the libraries in Cheshire, Pittsfield, and Adams, and eventually one of those libraries is going to get the archive up on their servers so that they can be shared over the internet. So what is a digital photograph? I'm not going to get too technical here, but I will just tell you that it's a photograph where numbers are used to record what's in the photograph. And when the numbers are grouped together, they're known as bytes. Take this photograph, for example, of Stafford Hill Monument. If I ask my computer to show me how that's stored on the computer, this is what it will show. It takes almost 8 million bytes to get that photograph recorded. So if they can store photographs on a computer and they're all numbers, how are the photographs put into the computer as numbers? Well, this drawing is a good way to think of it. Each space on the drawing is assigned a number. And this is a very simple one, which has only 7 colors. The size of each shape is rather odd and certainly varies, but that's not the case with a digital photograph. In a digital photograph, all the spaces are the same size, and each one is called a pixel. Fewer pixels means the resolution will be less, and it won't be a detailed picture. This eye, for example, has a lot more pixels, and it looks a lot more detailed than that watermelon. But maybe you can't see the individual pixels until I enlarge it. Now they start to become visible, and if I enlarge it one more time, you can certainly see how that photograph is stored on the computer as individual pixels. Each pixel can be a different color. Take this photograph, for example. I'm going to zoom in on that blue ball that's floating in the water. And when I enlarge, when I zoom in, for example, this is what it looks like. Now, you still can't see the individual pixels at this level of zoom, but if I go one more level, now you can see the pixels. And the computer assigns a number based on the color. Every color has a different number, and it can have a total of 256 colors on this particular picture. So what the computer remembers are those numbers. And when it wants to display the picture, it knows what color to put in each of those squares. So let's get into Cheshire's digital archive. They're all photographs. They're photographs of newspaper articles, photographs of maps, of other documents, and photographs of the things that are in the display case. It takes 111 trillion bytes of storage for this archive. That's a lot of numbers. Here's how it looks if I ask it to show me this archive. It says it contains 21,021 files in 479 different folders. And altogether, that's over 111 million bytes of data. Here's how it's organized. I've put things in folders based on that particular subject. The very first one are digital slides that have been shown in various presentations in the past. And I have to thank Lee Webb from Cheshire, who now lives in Oregon, who helped me to enhance those photographs. And there's 453 files or 453 photographs in that folder. Go down a little further and you'll see a folder called books about halfway down that first column. There's 848 books in that folder. If we go over to the middle column and go down to houses, number 43, there's 4,573 photographs of houses. The last folder on the right, I don't have a number next to it, but it contains items that Jared Martin has collected, historical items. And I thank Jared for sharing them and allowing me to put them into Cheshire's archive. All right, let's take a look at this particular presentation by the Massachusetts Historical Archive. They were on public television, and they were talking about the things that they have in their archive. And the first thing they talked about was this bottle of tea that was gathered up on the shore of Dorchester Beach on the morning after the destruction of the cargo off Boston, December 17, and that should say 1773. So it's the tea from the Boston Tea Party. And they considered that their most precious item in their archive. What surprised me was the next thing that they brought up. It's a piece of the wooden screw from Cheshire when we made the mammoth cheese. The cheese was made in the summer of 1801, eventually presented to Thomas Jefferson. So they have this item in their archive. So now let's take a look at our archive. We'll look at some of the oldest, some of the unusual, and some of the things I consider to be most interesting. Certainly, we're not going to look at all 21,000, but we'll just take a variety. And the first one I'm going to show you is our piece of the wooden screw from the making of the mammoth cheese. I'll read this inscription for you. A section of one of the screws in the cider mill of Captain Daniel Brown of Cheshire, Massachusetts, that pressed the big cheese presented by the citizens of Cheshire, January 1802, to Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States. The presentation made by the Reverend John Leland, pastor of the Baptist Church. Weight of the cheese, 1,450. Diameter, 4 feet, 7 inches. So I can give you a little more detail. The cheese actually weighed 1,235 pounds. I don't know why they have the incorrect weight there, but maybe this is before it was cured and some of the moisture was evaporated. They also had made a couple of smaller cheeses, and maybe they added those weights, although those cheeses were not presented to Jefferson. Only this one cheese, and it should be called the mammoth cheese, which is how it's become known today. And they actually presented it January 1st to Thomas Jefferson. It left Cheshire in November of 1801. It took a month to get to Washington by various means, and they presented it January 1st, 1802. If you're interested in more details about this, I've written a book called The Mammoth Cheese When America Watched Cheshire. Here's an item. I don't think in 100 years, you'd guess what's inside this old book. The book was started to be recorded in 1793. One of the things that I found in a box up there in the archive room. And here's what it showed. It was all the markings that they put on their cows and cattle to keep track of who it belonged to. They did not use the kind of branding that we see out west. Instead, they marked the ear of each cow. And this tells you what marking each farm had. I'm going to zoom in so we can look at a couple of them. Valentine Bowen is a half lop of the underside of the left ear. And John Bennett is a hole in the left ear. And for example, Stephen Carpenter is a fork in the left ear. David Mason is a fork in each ear. Now, when a farmer stopped having cows, that way of marking was given to someone else. So you can see David Mason's was given to James Brown, February 8th, 1811. By the way, it doesn't look like Mason, but the S at the time was written as an F. It's an interesting item. It was done in 1858, and it's known as the Stafford Hill Independent newspaper. It was done by an 18-year-old, John Farnham, and I'm going to zoom in on the heading so that you can see it in more detail. By the way, this Farnham is not the same family that owned the lime company. This Farnham lived up closer to Stafford Hill, and the name is spelled slightly different. He did this newspaper in April of 1858. By the way, right in the middle is the word mass. And again, the first S is written as an F. When there are two S's together, the second S is written the way we would write it today. It makes reading their writing very difficult. I'm going to show you one article from this newspaper. This is the Fashions from 1857. And John Farnham has a little article in a newspaper about women's fashions. Here's the article. Again, very difficult to read in his writing, so here it is below. Spring fashions for ladies are not going to be so ridiculous as heretofore. The bonnets are to be worn on the back of the head instead of the back of the neck. The enormousness of the hoops is also to be reduced, and by fall it is hoped that it will be no longer an excursion for a man to walk around his wife and daughter. You can see the bad condition of the paper that this newspaper was written on. By the way, the new book I have has a chapter on this newspaper, and it shows you it's in an entirety and gives you some background information on Farnham and why he wrote it. Probably can't read the name on this garage, but it says Bennett's Garage. And the clue as to where it's located might be the trolley line that's shown in the foreground. Well, that garage was eventually sold, and it became Lamb's Garage. And here you can see how it looked when Lamb bought it and renovated it. Notice the large opening for the cars to go in and out. And then just to the right of that is the door. Same as what Bennett had up above. Well, in 1951, this is how Lamb's Garage looked. It put an addition on. And it's a little hard to tell where the original was, but it's the section on the left. You have the large door where the cars go in and out, and right behind one of the gas pumps is a window where that door used to be to go in and out. Now, when they renovated it again, and this is about 1963, they put that door back in. So if you look way on the left, you'll see the large door for cars to go in and out, and then a smaller door for people to go in and out. So the original building was kept through all these renovations and just added on. And finally, this is the way that building looks now. It's been turned into Cheshire's Volunteer Fire Department building. Again, on the left is the original Bennett's building. The window, the large building on the large window on the right is the place where the cars went in and out, and that door was the original door in Bennett's garage. Here's one of the oldest photographs in the archive, approximately from 1870. I believe it could be Reynolds' store, which at the time this photograph was taken would have been owned by Walcott and known as Walcott's store. Here's the way it looked when George Dean owned it. And here's another photograph when Mr. Reynolds bought it. That'd be Harold Reynolds. And this photograph was enhanced by Lee Webb. One of my favorite photographs Can you figure out what street that is in Cheshire? Trolley line goes down the right side of the street. It may be a little hard to tell because all the trees make it look so different, but it's Main Street, or what we now call Church Street. And there's a house on Church Street that has a walkway that goes out to the road, and that's the house on the right. It's sort of a ramp that goes down out to the road, and that house is still there. It's almost across from St. Mary's Church. One of the things I like about this photograph is what that boy's doing. If I zoom in, you can see he's actually washing the sidewalk. You don't see that very often today. And his mother looks like she's doing some work on the sidewalk going up to the house. There's two other photographs of streets in Cheshire. Take a minute and see if you can figure out where they are. Again, they certainly look different today. The top one does because there are no trees on the street. And the bottom one looks a lot different today because there are houses now in some of those empty spaces. Well, the top photograph is Depot Street. And way at the far end of this photograph is the Cheshire train station, now Chick's Auto. The photograph at the bottom also shows the trolley line, and that's the trolley line going north to Adams, and it's going up the hill by where Fred Mason Road comes on to Route 8. So that little road going off to the left is Fred Mason Road. The house is still there, and a little further up the hill would be the state police barracks. Well, one of the things I'm going to show you has to do with sheep. And I was really surprised when I came across it. And I couldn't figure out why it was there, so I did some research. And what I found out was the most popular months for breeding sheep are September, October, and November, since ewes bred in these months tend to have the highest fertility. We don't think of Cheshire as having a lot of sheep. It did have a lot of dairy cows, that's for sure, but we did have farmers that had sheep. And I started recording the first minutes of the selectmen meetings when Cheshire became a town. We became an incorporated town in March of 1793, actually March 14th. And so here's a copy of the first meeting. It was held April 1st, 1793. You can see the enlargement on the right. You can clearly read the 1 April 1793. You probably have a hard time reading the rest of the minutes, and I'm going to just look at a couple of items. They're shown with the arrows on the left. The first item, if I enlarge it, that section, we can see that the first item says, voted that all rams be confined by the owner from going at large from the 1st September to the 20th of November. Voted that all rams found going at large within the time above limited be forfeited to those who shall take them up. So you weren't allowed to let the rams loose during the fertile time of the female sheep. Now, the second red arrow reads as follows: voted that the town be divided into 12 districts for better keeping of the highways in repair. Well, I thought that was a little unusual. And so they formed a committee, and on the next week, the committee reported out what the 12 districts were going to be. Here is a page from that showing what those districts were. You can see down the left side the numbers 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, 5, etc. And again, I'm not going to read them all. For one thing, it's a little hard to tell what the districts were because they mention houses. Like it starts at the corner of such and such house and goes to the end of somebody else's house. And of course, those names and houses are no longer relevant. What I do want to point out to you, though, is down at the bottom, it says that any district should have more than their equal portion of the road to be helped by the town at large. So in other words, the town itself wasn't responsible for the roads. It was the people that lived in each district. And if your district had more roads than the others, then the town at large would help you maintain it. Now, these aren't the men from 1793, but it's an interesting photograph. Men working on a road. Of course, all the roads were dirt. And besides the shovels, they had a 4-horsepower road scraper. They're working on Dean Street. And you can see the town hall in the background. Pretty interesting road crew. So let's look at another folder within the archive, the folder called Houses. And like I told you before, it had 4,573 files. It actually has 144 folders within this. That's because some of the more interesting houses have their own individual folder. We'll take a look at one of them, the Beechwood, which was also Walcott's Tavern. Here's what's in that folder. And we're going to zoom in on a couple of photographs. Starting with this one. This one was taken in approximately 1868, and this is Walcott's Tavern. Now, this is located, or was located, right by the red light in Cheshire on Route 8 in the southwest corner. And Walcott started this tavern in 1795, he built it. It's interesting, when I zoomed in on the picture, you can see a couple of people in the window even looking out as the photograph was taken. And by the way, the place on the right, the addition on the right, was a store that Walcott's wife, Freelove, ran. I believe one of the gentlemen sitting on the steps has a Civil War uniform on. So Felix Petitclerc bought that property in the 1860s, and he renovated it. And he turned it into his private home. And this is what it looked like. He kept the shell of the original tavern. He added a new roof, a mansard-style roof. But by matching photographs, I was able to tell that the chimneys are still in the exact same place. It still has the same number of windows. The doors are in the same place. You can see the addition on the right where the store was. So it's pretty obvious that he kept the bones of the original structure and just made it look beautiful as a home. After he passed away, it became the Beechwood House. And it was a Berkshire lodge, a bed and breakfast. Later on, it became a nursing home. The nursing home closed and the building went into disrepair. and eventually it was torn down. It was actually demolished in 2022. And this is another old house in Cheshire known as the Cedars, built in 1854 by Allison Dean, photograph from 1867. This is actually a photograph you're supposed to put in a viewer so that things looked three-dimensional. Notice the item at the top of the house, the cupola up at the very top. From the history of Cheshire, the glass factory at first manufactured window glass only, but commenced in 1854 to make rough plate glass for floors and roofs. For this, they cast the glass, rolled it under an immense pressure, and when finished, it was half an inch in thickness. Well, Allison Dean was a very prosperous businessman. He had a very large lumber mill. And when he was building that house, I think he decided to try that plate glass on the floor of his cupola. And so I believe that glass is probably the first piece or one of the very first pieces of plate glass made in America. And it served as a skylight for the stairway going up to the cupola. Now, that glass factory in Cheshire, by the way, didn't last very long. They ended up breaking the cast iron plate that they used to roll the glass, and they gave up that business. And it was transferred to a glass factory in Lennoxdale. And what's interesting is, shortly after, John Ford from Pittsburgh came up to view how they were making plate glass. He went back to Pittsburgh and started his own factory, and that became known as Pittsburgh Plate Glass Factory, one of the largest in the world. But Cheshire made the first piece of plate glass in America, and there it is in the Cedars. Now, the Cedars is also interesting because, as I said, Allison Dean owned a wood lumber mill, and the walls of his house are stacked 2x4s. They're not studs like we build a wall today. And that gave extra insulation and strength to the walls. Of course, back in 1854, they didn't need to run wires or plumbing in the walls. So this made a lot of sense if you had plenty of lumber. Those are real 2x4s, by the way, 2 inches by 4 inches. Another old house that's part of that file, built in 1870, or excuse me, the photograph was probably taken about 1870. And this house is known as Broadlawn today. Where do you think it is? It's not visible from anywhere, any street in Cheshire. But if you pull into the parking lot of the Baptist church and look out back, you will see this house. This photograph is of the side of the house, actually taken from Church Street, almost in front of what was Reynolds' store. And they had a driveway going from Church Street up to the house. The window there looks like a person is looking out. It's actually a hole in the photograph. The plate that the photograph is on is deteriorating, and it causes that stain on the photograph. Here's what Broadlawn looks like today. The Jennings family lived there. It was built by and owned at one time by a family of Browns, and that's why the B is on that canopy. It has been changed a little bit from the original structure, but you can still see most of the identifying parts of that original house. I'll go back to that first picture. Okay, three more houses, actually two more. The one on the upper left is the first house built in Cheshire. It has an addition to it, so it's not in its original shape, but that was built in 1768 by Joseph Bennett. Joseph Bennett came from Rhode Island. He actually was the person that bought the acreage that became known as New Providence. He and a fellow by the name of John Cook bought that acreage. And when Bennett came, he built this house. He kept 300 acres for himself, some of the prime land. Cook never came to Cheshire, stayed in Rhode Island, eventually became a governor. Joseph Bennett's property was eventually bought by or traded for by with John Wells. And it became known as the Wells Farm. And that's the reason the street nearby is known as Wells Road. Today, that property is owned by the Jaco family. The other two photographs are of a very old house built by Captain Lowe. It's on Jenks Road. And I believe that house was also built in 1868 or 1768, or possibly in the next year, 1769. But it would be the second oldest house in Cheshire. Where do you think this house is? It doesn't look anything like the photograph here because it's been enlarged. But I love this photograph with the two carriages, one coming out the gate and one loading with people by the front door. The house was later modified and is now the Harbor Bed and Breakfast. And that dotted line marks the original house on the right and the addition on the left of the line. And you can pretty much tell that the windows, again, are all in the same place. The two windows, large windows on the bottom floor, were actually enlarged from the two windows in the original house. And of course, they changed the roof line a little bit and put the items there. But the chimneys are still in the same place. One of the things we have in our archive are some photographs taken by the Howe brothers. Most of them were taken in the 1890s. And I wanted to find out more about them. So I did some research and found out that they lived in Ashfield. And when I called the Historical Society in Ashfield, it turns out that they have a room where they keep all the Howe brothers' original photographs, along with his camera and some other memorabilia. So when I went to that archive room, I took some photographs that he had made in Cheshire. Let's look at a couple of them. Every time he took a photograph, the family came out in front, probably the first time they had been photographed. I'm not sure where this house is. This house is on Depot Street. It doesn't look quite as nice today, but it's still there in some form. You'll notice the people from the family came out and they're sitting next to the trees. This house, I believe, is on Dean Street. And here's a very old house on Prospect Hill. And that house is still there, although it's having some additions put on. So it does look a little different. But you'll notice the bay window on the right side. And when you go up Prospect Hill and look at the house, you can see that bay window. Papa must have been at work when this photograph was taken, but Mama and the kids are out there getting their photograph taken. This one has not only the family, but their horse. I'm not 100% sure where this house is either. Nine people photographed in this house. And 10 horses. The boy at the left is actually holding 2 horses. Another photograph that Howe took, not of a house, but of this gentleman going around in his refrigerated wagon. Obviously, it had blocks of ice in there to keep things cold. I'm not sure where the photograph was taken, but it may be in front of what was Butch's Market on Church Street. Now, there are many other pictures of houses in that file folder, but they don't have their own individual folder. They're just listed as you see them here. Another thing that I photographed was Bernice Madigan's, known as Benny Madigan's, photo album. Elaine Daniels had it, and she allowed me to look at it, and I took a photograph of every page. We'll look at a couple of her photographs in detail. She dated each photograph. These are from 1923. And most of them are of her family. But this particular photograph I thought was interesting. It's of the Methodist Church. And you can see the parsonage is shown up above that house and is next to the church. And down below are 2 photographs of the church. The one on the right is earlier, 1918, and the one on the left shows an addition that they made to the front of the church, taken in 1925. A little close-up of that addition, which is the way the church looks today. So there's a lot of old maps in the archive. This is one of the original ones from 1766 of New Providence. Job Stafford was hired by Bennett and Lee to come up to this location and survey out lots for New Providence. Most of the lots are large, either 200 or 100 acres. The one that's labeled River is the lot that Bennett saved for himself. And the one below it was supposedly going to be the one for Cook, who, as I mentioned before, never came. Stafford Hill would be pretty much the area on the right side of the map. The Hoosick River is shown going right through Bennett and Cook's property. Here's another old map from 1793. It was done as Cheshire was being incorporated. The squiggly line going through the center of the map, again, is the Hoosick River. Almost in the middle of the map, at a crossroads, is a little building which is actually where the Baptist church was. That's the Second Baptist Church, because the original one was actually, that's the Third Baptist Church, because the original one was at the bottom of Stafford Hill on Jenks Road, and then a second one was built on top of Stafford Hill. And as people left the hill and moved down into the valley in the village of Cheshire, they built that Baptist church. Some more maps. The one in the middle on the top is one of my favorites. It's the map from 1858. It's a nice, colorful map, very detailed. It also has another part of it that is not photographed here, but it's a detail of the village, showing the names and the location and the shape of all the houses in the village of Cheshire. To the right of that is the map from 1876. And then down below on the left, 1894, and finally 1904. Cheshire changed its shape, by the way, several different times over the years. And my first book, The History of Cheshire's Incorporation and the Shape It's in, discusses why we're shaped so oddly and how those borders changed over the years. It also has a photograph of all the cornerstones when I found them. In fact, this map is in that book, and it shows you how Cheshire was incorporated as a town by taking sections of Lanesborough on the left, which is the gray area, Windsor on the right, which is the green section. The blue section is the original New Providence, which at the time was then part of Adams. And finally, the yellow part is New Ashford on the upper left. Number 1 in the center of the photograph of the map is the center of the village of Cheshire, pretty much where Route 8 and Church Street or Main Street intersect. This is an interesting document, very old. It's a letter of reference for John Leland. And the person who wrote it is very famous, James Madison. John Leland was born in Massachusetts, but after he became a minister, he went to Virginia, and he practiced there for many years. I think it was approximately 13 years. And he got to know James Madison. He got to know Thomas Jefferson. Leland was very influential in Virginia. In fact, he and James Madison used to debate items dealing with the Constitution. And the story of that is in my book about the mammoth cheese. This old document I was searching for in our archive up over the police station, and I couldn't find it. So I ended up going to the Berkshire Registry of Deeds in Pittsfield, and I found it in their basement in a cardboard box. And what it is a petition from people in Cheshire and Adams asking that the road from Cheshire through Adams up to North Adams would be rebuilt. And it was a petition from 1828. That petition was given to the county commissioners, and they accepted the request. And in 1830, that road was rebuilt. And Cheshire's Keystone Bridge, which is in the harbor section of Cheshire, was built in 1830. It was later modified, by the way, when the trolleys came from Adams. And that's another chapter in my latest book. This letter was found in Cheshire in about 1844. And it was written by Benedict Arnold. And he's asking for the people in the southern towns, Cheshire being one of them, to join him in attacking Fort Ticonderoga. The letter is now in the history department of the Berkshire Anthonyum. All right, the oldest photograph, 1867. Again, it's of what was called Main Street, now Church Street, and it's looking from in front of Reynolds Store up towards Route 8 where the red light is, and you can see Walcott's Tavern there. There is a lady standing on the right side of the photograph with her big hoop, white skirt. Walcott's Tavern. Two photographs. Which one is older? Well, I believe the one on the left is older. You'll notice that the porch has basically one step down to the road. And I believe the road was altered, and then they ended up having another step added to meet the road. This is Walcott Store, then Dean Store, and then Reynolds. Now, this is not a photograph of Cheshire, but when I was doing some research about photographs, I found that De Geer was the person who really invented the first type of photograph. And he took this in 1838. And supposedly it's the first photograph of a person. And that person is shown on the bottom getting their shoes shined. I believe the exposure time for this was 7 minutes. But still, there were people walking, and they didn't stay in one place long enough for them to make their image on the film. Here's a close-up of the man getting his shoe shined. By the way, it was the following year when the first portrait of a person was taken. but this is supposedly the first photograph with a person in the image. Okay, let's keep going and see what else we have. In the folder on books, this is what's there. Each of those items is a complete book. Some of them are hundreds of pages long. Some of them may only be 20 or 30 pages long. But when I was doing research and I had to find some information, and it was a book that you could download, I brought the book to this archive and then left it there after I got the information out of it. One of the books in the Cheshire Archive that I just recently scanned is this book of poetry. It's by Elizabeth King. This says that she passed from earth life to spirit life in 29/1861. I think that might be August or September. Can't tell exactly what the month is. And it's quite a long book. There must be close to 80 pages of poetry. All right. These are the prior books that I've written. The one on the right is actually the one that I'm introducing today. The first book, The History of Cheshire's Incorporation and the Shape It's In, is the one that I wrote after I found all the 22 corners. And while I was doing that, I researched for why and how we got incorporated. I found the mysteries that I thought I would share in the second book, Historical Mysteries of Cheshire. The other books pretty much came because of a historical talk I gave. And afterwards, I decided to incorporate that talk into a book. The exception to that is the one at the bottom middle, The History of Cheshire. One day somebody told me, "Did you hear about the new history book on Cheshire?" And I said, "No, somebody else is writing a book on Cheshire." And they said, "Yes, I saw it in Barnes and Noble." And so I did some investigating, and it turns out Barnes and Noble didn't have the book in their store, but you could order it online. And it was the book that Rayner and Petticlerk wrote in 1885 about the history of Cheshire. And if you ordered that book, they would print a copy and email it to you. Because it was out of copyright, they were allowed to do that. Well, I decided that I would do the same. I would print copies, but I would enhance it. I added page after page of photographs in the back that talk about what or show what Rayner and Petticlerk were talking about, because their book has no photographs. I also added maps. And then at the beginning, I added a chapter on how we actually became a town. So when I did that, I ended up for a couple of years selling that book and giving the proceeds to the Council on Aging. The book on to the right of that, What Is and What Was, I had given a walking tour of Cheshire, and somebody said that they had missed it, but they wish they could have been there. And I thought, well, let me see if I can put something together that would give you that same experience. Okay, let's take a quick look at what's inside the new book.
Good. How are you doing?
These are the chapters. When and where were Cheshire's prisoner of war camps? What is the true age of Cheshire Harbor Trolley Bridge? Why only one issue of 1858 Stafford Hill newspaper? That's the one I showed you part of the first page of earlier. Who actually voted for President Jefferson? What happened to Stafford's memorial tablets? What is under Cheshire's reservoir? Why was Cheshire's trolley service unique? Who wrote these Civil War letters? And who was Cheshire's famous madam? And finally, what are the forgotten cemeteries? Cheshire had a prisoner of war camp, and his first chapter tells you about the diary that one of the prisoners wrote while he was staying here, and gives you a pretty good insight into what life was like being a prisoner in Cheshire.
Freezer is still working, but it's not cold.
Another chapter, as I mentioned, is of the 1854 Stafford newspaper. And in that chapter, you'll see the complete newspaper. The Civil War letters were given to me by Elaine Daniels to photograph and archive, and they're very difficult to read. There's no capitalization, no punctuation. Some of the words are spelled differently from the way we do it today. But I did decipher them, and I found them very interesting. So there they are as a chapter in this book, and they are transcribed so that you can read them. This is a newspaper article about one of the memorials on Stafford Hill. And as you can see from the underline, it says Sons of the American Revolution in North Adams. They were the ones that decided to create this Stafford Hill monument in 1926. And a few years, oh, by the way, this is a photograph of the one they copied. This is in Newport, Rhode Island. And Stafford came from that area, so they decided to make the monument look like this one. It's been known forever as the Stafford Hill Memorial. Well, it was erected in memory of the pioneers and patriots of New Providence. It has a new official name. I discovered that when I was trying to investigate what happened to the memorial tablets that used to be in there. And here's what I found. Worcester, let's read it. Changing of the name of memorial at Stafford Hill in East Cheshire from Stafford Hill Memorial to the Berkshire County Revolutionary War Shrine dedicated to the pioneers and patriots of New Providence. So that's an official name change by the Sons of the American Revolution who put up that monument. We had 6 or 7 plaques inside that monument. I'll show you a picture of them in a minute, but they were vandalized and stolen. We didn't even realize it until almost a year later. And this newspaper article appeared offering a reward.
Oh, so they're molars. Oh, gotcha.
This is the program from the dedication of 2 of the memorial tablets. This was done in 1933.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Another newspaper article about 2 other tablets, one for the Masons and one for the Silver Grays. They were pretty elaborate tablets. This is what the one for the Silver Grays had on it.
Yeah.
As you can see, it was a very large inscription.
Applesauce, smoothies, and ice cream.
A photograph of one of the tablets commemorating the founding of the Baptist Church. And this tablet also had the names of all the people that were first members of that church.
Oh, boy.
The state of Vermont dedicated a tablet. Another old photograph, but it does show that there were tablets on each of the pillars. And these are the only 2 that we currently have. All the others were stolen, and who knows whether they still exist. Probably they were melted down for the value of the metal. So in my chapter, I give you more details and information about this episode. So thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. By the way, if you're interested in ordering any of my books, you can find them on the internet in a site by Wix, W-I-X. And so if you go to wix.com and search for Emery books, you should find them. I would email me if you're interested in a copy, and I will mail it to you. Each book is $20 plus $3 shipping, which is a considerable savings over what Amazon charges if you were to order it through them. This photograph, by the way, shows the cobbles up at the top of the mountain. And in the lower part of the photograph, you can see the ironworks and the two igloo-shaped structures that were used to make charcoal. Also, in the middle bottom, in the foreground, is the school on Church Street. On School Street. And that's Greylock Academy. And that's the reason that the street is named School Street. The elementary school was eventually built in that open field. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation.